Second part. The mayor and the director craned their necks, looking upward. A heartbeat after that cry, there was a terrific thud at the pair's feet as an enormous ochre insect landed. The creature's segmented body resembled caterpillars, but of its 6 bristle-covered legs, the 2 nearest its head were shaped like human hands, and each of them clutched something resembling a nearly 3-foot-long sword. A pair of weapons were now lodged in the abdomen of the 6.5-foot creature. One of them, a rough wooden needle, came from D. If the other one, an 8-inch-long throwing dart, was one of Lilia's weapons, she must have hurled it with the same speed as D. And judging from the way the weapons formed a V at the single point where their tips met, right in the creature's heart, most likely, she was just as accurate as D, too. The mayor and the scholar both let out a scream. Without a second to spare, the 2 hunters raised their hands, and the bizarre bugs that fell one after another from the ceiling began twitching in their death throes. And the mayor was left speechless. But in his stead, the gray-haired scholar said, "Those look just like the western frontiers." "That's right, they're gladiator bugs," Lilia replied. Recent weather anomalies and frequent geological shifts have caused changes in the home ranges of some creatures. This must be one of them. Usually they make their nests up in attics, so we'll have to watch out. As she enthusiastically explained the situation, 2 more of the insects flew down right in front of her. These came down differently. They weren't wounded. Standing erect on their lowest pair of legs, they pointed the swords they held in their hands at the 2 hunters. Gladiator bugs. As the name suggested, these insects used real swords. Needless to say, they weren't a product of the natural world. Nobles in the western frontier had created them for their own amusement. Monsters born in their laboratories to do battle with human slaves. After the fall of the nobles' civilization, most of them were exterminated. But it was said the less than 10% that escaped into the frontier gave rise to the hundreds of thousands that now live there. As specialists in combat, the nobles had input formidable swordsmanship skill into the bugs' brains. Slashing down from a high position, the blades locked together, and Lilia's expression became one of mild surprise. One of the swords made a horizontal slash at her abdomen. As Lilia leapt back, about 4 inches of her coat were torn open. "Not too shabby," she said, her voice faltering. The body of the insect that lunged at her from an angle to her right then pitched forward wildly. A heartbeat later, her blade slipped into the crease beneath its head, removing that segment neatly from the insect's body. Quickly shifting her eyes from the twitching bug to D behind her, Lilia pursed her lips in apparent dismay, saying, "What's this?" D was just sheathing his blade. At his feet lay an insect that had been quartered by horizontal and vertical slashes. "Quicker than me. You're good, stud," Lilia said, jabbing D's shoulder with the longsword she held. "Sorry, but I need you to draw again. We need more than bugs to settle this once and for all. Perhaps this little business has changed his mind. Why don't we negotiate?" D turned his back to them and headed for the door. Lilia caught herself. Once he had left and the door had closed, she had said to no one in particular, "Great. I picked a fight with him when I shouldn't have, and now I regret it." He cut that bug down without moving an inch from where he started. Page break. Excuse me?" Hearing the voice of the woman chasing them, the hoarse voice from the vicinity of D's left hand remarked, "It's her. What are you gonna do?" Just let it be.
But she sounds all fired up. I don't think she'll just let it be. Hell, she'd follow you into the men's room.
Ultimately, Lilia caught up to the hunter where he had his cyborg horse tethered to a hitching post. I told you to wait, didn't I? Didn't you hear me, partner?
Partner?
The reply caused Lilia's eyes to go wide with a look of uncertainty. She'd heard two voices. One from Dee, up in the saddle, and one from his left hand gripping the reins. A hoarse one. That's right. Right after you left, the mayor hired you and me both. Probably had something to do with the way we hacked apart those gladiator bugs, naturally. Unfortunately, I haven't hired on with anybody. Cracking the reins against the cyborg horse's neck, Dee started forward on his steed. As she looked back and forth between where she'd left her own horse and the young man riding away, Lilia said, "Let's do this. Let's work together. The mayor told me to get you to stay. That was his first job for me."
You'll get a smaller cat,
the hoarse voice said. "That's not a problem. They agreed to $30,000 each, not $1 more. But they said if it was just me, the chances of success would decrease, so it'd only be $20,000. That's why I can't have you running off anywhere else." As Lilia walked alongside the cyborg horse, she seemed to have run out of things to say.
What was the aircraft carrying, anyway?
The hoarse voice inquired.
Huh?
I haven't asked yet. I've had all I could do just catching up to you. It doesn't matter. I'm leaving, Dee said in a voice like exquisite ice. As he made a move to leave the grounds of the mayor's estate, he appeared emotionless, as if he'd already abandoned them. So, you mean to tell me the guy who bothered to ask what it was carrying doesn't care anymore? Something doesn't add up here. Stop playing me for a fool. Saying nothing, Dee left. The air seemed to be stirred with shattered ice as it took on a bluish tinge, trying to lend the same hue to the silvery chain of mountain peaks in the distance. The village was surrounded by a mountain range. Once he'd gone through the gates, Lilia stopped. I haven't given up, you know. I'll chase you down to the very gates of Satan's hell. Pageberg. On the way down the road back to the village, the hoarse voice said,
Peace and quiet at last. But she'll be coming again. Not that I have anything against that type. Why, before I wound up like this, well, it was quite a long time ago, but I seem to recall chasing one or two like her.
A long time ago, Dee said, looking up at the heavens. The moon was out. The moonlight seemed to lend a white glow to his face, but that was because Dee's beautiful face radiated a light of its own.
Yep, a long time ago,
the hoarse voice replied.
But then, what's a long time? How long have the two of us been alive? And what about you-know-who? Could he even call what we do, or what he does, living? What are life and death? I suppose only he can answer that. You know, Dee, I have to wonder if we aren't chasing after him to get him to tell us that.
Are you tired? Dee asked, turning his eyes to the silvery chain of peaks. If so, I can take you off right here. You can go wherever you like.
Hold it right there. Neither you nor I can do anything of the sort.
We've never tried. How about it?
I'll pass. For the time being, anyway.
The blueness over the rustic route deepened as the gorgeous silhouette rode down it, and the pair's conversation died out. Presently, the cyborg horse came to the busiest part of the village.
As I recall, they're supposed to make a kind of salsa booze in this village. Let's go have a drink.
the hoarse voice suggested. Resist the urge.
No can do. Let me drink some of that salsa booze. I could down 20 or 30 gallons of the stuff. I'll take on all comers.
The hoarse voice became an angry shout that seemed likely to reach the edge of the village and beyond.
I'll pay $10,000 to any man that can outdrink me. Lose and you won't owe me any money. But the offer's only open to men with wives, or those with daughters over 17.
Dee was just about to lash his steed with the reins when the doors to the saloon on his right opened, and figures bundled in heavy overcoats streamed out, blocking the sidewalk horse from going any farther. I'll take you up on that. Me too. No, I'm first. It was as plain as the noses on their ruddy faces that all these farmers were already well into their cups. They ranged from those who looked to still be in their teens all the way up to a hunched-over bald man who had to be over 100. Okay, my friend, step into the saloon, one of them said. We're glad to have you.
Very well. I'm only too glad to accept your challenges,
said the hoarse voice. Kinda husky voice you've got there, but you've got nerve, and I like that. The village graveyard has a corner where they bury everyone who drinks himself to death. Page break. It was about 20 minutes later that Lilia, having collected her sidewalk horse, galloped up to the saloon. What's going on here? A number of the villagers were stacked in a mound in front of the batwing doors. As Lilia furrowed her brow, another one tottered through the doors and took his place at the top of the pile before her very eyes. What is this? She was sure something was wrong. Swiftly dismounting, she went over to the man who'd just collapsed, and then she heard laughter from inside the saloon. It was hoarse. It's him, she said. Spinning on her toe, Lilia pushed her way through the swinging doors. Though she'd smelled it from outside the saloon, the fierce stink of alcohol now assailed her nose. That alone would have been enough to leave a child with alcohol poisoning. The saloon could hold perhaps 30 people total, but it looked as if twice that number were crowded in front of the tiny counter. Nudging some of the farmers who lay strewn across the floor with the tip of her boot, she said, What's with these guys? Kicking one of them in the side to roll him over, Lilia grabbed 4 of the villagers who were crowded around the counter by the scruff of the neck, jerking them out of the way before pressing forward. Okay, pretty boy, now it's time for you to throw down with yours truly, said a giant of a man seated on one of the center stools, his right hand lifting a whiskey glass. The figure to his left said, You country bumpkins and your big talk. The caustic remark came from a hoarse-voiced D. You think because you're one of the hardest drinking fellas on the forsaken sticks of the frontier you can beat me? Dream on. His left hand indicated the men on the floor, and the motion was jerky, as if somewhat forced. The giant was easily angered. Now you've gone and said it. Hey, Bob. This glass takes too damn long. Bring us some beer mugs. A cheer went up. The villagers must have been expecting big things from their local hero. The mugs were set up in front of them. They were filled to the brim with salsa booze, a kind of alcohol that was said to be 10 times as potent as absinthe. Both raised their mugs. The rule was that they drained them simultaneously. Well, Prost. The man's mug tilted, and its contents swiftly began to disappear. The giant's Adam's apple bobbed frantically. Whew, he roared, and he was just about to set his mug down when a din erupted, more gasps than cheers. D had already set his empty mug down. Pretty boy here. The giant stopped, somewhat tongue-tied. Hey, let's have another round, Bob. Sorry, Basco, we're all out. What? Think about it. We've emptied 5 kegs in 20 minutes' time. But what worries me more than how I'm gonna open for business tomorrow is these guys lying all over the place. Okay, the giant said, clambering off the stool. Raising both hands and taking a boxing stance, he said, "We'll settle it with these, pretty boy. A man's gotta prove himself with his fists, not his cups." Second part, end.